Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Part 2 training on the ILS Parent Representation Semi-Annual Report, also known as the PRR 195. Before we get into Part 2, I just want to review a few reminders from Part 1. First, the current reporting period only applies to the model offices and the first and second Family Defense Grants. Recipients of the third Family Defense Grant are not yet required to report, as implementation is in its very early stages and we have yet to have our individual data collection meetings. And we will soon be in touch about that. For those who are reporting, just a reminder that the current reporting period is the date your contract was signed by ILS through June 30th, 2024. We went over this in greater detail before the Part 1 training and also during the Part 1 training. But if you have remaining questions about the reporting period for your office, please don't hesitate to reach out. And lastly, just want to remind everyone that some questions on the PRR 195 may not be relevant to every provider's grant-funded project. And for that reason, we have built in skip patterns. So you will be able to skip these questions when you complete the form. So in Part 1, we discussed timely access. That is the investigation representation, or IR, as well as family court caseloads for the entire office. Today, in Part 2, we'll focus on representation once an Article 10 or a TPR petition has been filed. We'll also look at grant-funded attorney and specialized service positions and CLEs/trainings funded by the grant. We'll wrap up the training with some instructions on how to submit your report. So, as you are aware, the ILS Family Defense Grants, in line with the ILS practice standards for parent representation, are intended to be used to improve the quality of representation for parents in Article 10 and related proceedings. In your grant proposals and work plans, you articulate several of these themes listed here. For example, lengthy family separations and long wait times to reunification. You also describe what you hope to address with the ILS Family Defense funding or model office funding. For example, you might hope to see a reduction in removals and a reduction in out-of-home placements. So in this section of the report that we will review today, we have questions that touch upon each of these subtopics. Okay, so let's get into the questions themselves for Article 10 and TPR representation. So question 29. For Article 10 and TPR petitions opened during the reporting period, and how many of those petitions was an attorney present/not present at the first court appearance? So some background on this question is that it is included in part because many of our grant proposals mention this as an objective of the funding, wanting to have more attorneys available to be at that first court appearance. However, you may not currently be able to provide a response to this or to provide a complete response to this. And if that's the case, please simply select unable to report. And we hope that for the next round of reporting, you will be able to provide a complete response. If you can provide a response now, please do, and fill out the chart separated into categories of abuse petitions, neglect petitions, and termination of parental rights, TPR petitions. So we can go through an example quickly together. Let's say that you opened 5 abuse petitions during the reporting period, and at 4 out of those 5 first appearances, an attorney was present. So you'd put a 4 here in the first column and a 1 here in the second column. Question 30. For Article 10 and termination of parental rights petitions closed during the reporting period, how many began as IRs? So, as a reminder, IR stands for investigation representation, and it is that representation provided during the CPS investigation phase. It's meant to provide timely access to counsel for parents. So if you provide IR and are able to provide numbers by abuse, neglect, and TPR, please do so here. And if you provide IR but are not able to report on this question, simply select unable to report for this current reporting period. If you do not provide IR, you can enter N/A for not applicable. Question 31. For Article 10 and termination of parental rights petitions closed during the reporting period, please report the total number of children who were subjects of the petitions. We'll also run through an example here. So let's say that you closed 2 abuse petitions. On those 2 abuse petitions, an aggregate total of 5 children were involved. Maybe 2 children were subjects on one and 3 children were subjects on the other. Here we are asking for the aggregate number of children, not the number of petitions. So make sure that you add the children from both petitions together. So 2 plus 3 equals 5, right? So you have 5 children total that were subjects of the abuse petitions. The same thing goes for neglect. So let's say of the 8 neglect petitions closed, there was an aggregate of 15 children involved. And for example, let's say that you didn't close any TPRs during this reporting period. So 0 TPRs were closed. That means that there were 0 children involved. So you would enter a 0 here. One final thing to note, which can be helpful when you're checking your math, these 3 numbers here for abuse, neglect, and TPR petitions, they should equal the aggregate total number of children subjects of all 3 petition types for the reporting period. So in this case, 5 plus 15 plus 0 equals 20. So 20 children were subjects of the abuse, neglect, or TPR petitions closed during the reporting period. 32. For Article 10 petitions closed during the reporting period, please report the total number of children who were removed at any time during the Article 10 proceeding. So this is a total for both abuse and neglect petitions closed. Question 32A. Please report the total number of children removed during the Article 10 proceeding who were placed into the following initial placement options. We have the options here listed as kinship custody, kinship foster care, non-kinship foster care, institutional setting, non-respondent parent, or other/placement unknown. So we do understand that this question is requesting a high level of data collection, and some provider offices may not be able to report completely on the first round of reporting. So please do enter the numbers where you can. And if you are unable to report in one or more categories, please simply select the associated unable to report button. And also make sure to not leave blank. So if there were 0 children placed in kinship foster care during the reporting period, please don't leave that blank, just simply enter it 0. 32B. Please report the following. Of the children removed, how many experienced at least one change in placement? Of the children removed, how many were returned to your client's custody by the close of the petition? Of all children who were returned to parent, what was the average number of days that they were out of your client's custody? Of the children who were not returned, how many remained in placement at the close of the petition? So please enter the totals for each sub-question here. If 0 is applicable, maybe no children during the reporting period experienced a change in placement, then please enter that 0, don't leave it blank, and select unable to report when that is the case. Question 33 asks about fact-finding hearings. So for Article 10 and termination of parental right petitions closed during the reporting period, how many contested fact-finding hearings took place? This includes hearings which were commenced but were settled before the conclusion of the fact-finding hearing. So this is a fairly straightforward question, it simply asks for a total number of fact-finding hearings that took place for Article 10 and TPR petitions. 33A. Of the fact-finding hearings that took place for Article 10 petitions, please report the number of fact-finding hearing outcomes for all children who are subjects of the closed Article 10 petitions. So while 33 asks for the number of fact-finding hearings, 33A is asking about the outcomes of these hearings. And even more specifically, it's only asking about outcomes at the Article 10 hearings, so not the TPR hearings. There will be a separate question for that. So for the Article 10 fact-finding hearing outcomes, we have the following options listed here on the left-hand side of the screen. We have dismissed, adjournment in contemplation of dismissal, or ACD. We have withdrawal, finding after hearing, finding with consent, no admission, and finding with consent with admission. We also have an other category. So ILS is aware that practice can differ sometimes widely between counties. So if there is an outcome type that you have in your county, please do describe it in this section here. What that can do is it can inform us and we can adjust the report as needed, depending on what other information is provided here. One other thing to note is that outcomes are per child and not necessarily per petition. And we know that this kind of adds a layer of complexity to reporting, but it is necessary to separate them out because, as we know, there may be multiple children on the petition and they might each have different outcomes at fact finding. 33B. So of the fact-finding hearings that took place for termination of parental rights petitions, please report the number of fact-finding hearing outcomes for all children who are subjects of the closed TPR petitions. So this question is the counterpart to the last question, 33A. It also asks about outcomes at the fact-finding hearing, but in this one asks about TPR petitions, not Article 10. So we have listed here the outcomes for TPR fact-finding: dismissed, finding, conditional surrender, and then again we have that other category if you would like to describe another possible outcome. Question 34. For Article 10 and termination of parental rights petition closed, how many contested dispositional hearings took place? And again, this includes hearings which were commenced but settled before the conclusion of the dispositional hearing. This question is similar to 33, except for instead of fact-finding hearings, it asks about the number of dispositional hearings for both Article 10 and TPR petitions closed. 34A. Of the contested dispositional hearings that took place for Article 10 petitions, please report the number of dispositional hearing outcomes for all children who are subjects of the closed Article 10 petitions. So this is specifically for Article 10 dispositional outcomes. We have listed suspended judgment, order of protection, child released to client, child released to non-respondent other, foster care, custody/guardianship granted to client, custody/guardianship granted to other, and then we have an other category here. So please fill this out to the fullest extent possible and select unable to report if that's the case in any or multiple categories. And as always, enter 0 where applicable. 34B. Of the contested dispositional hearings that took place for the termination of parental rights petitions, please report the number of dispositional hearing outcomes for all children who were subjects of the closed TPR petitions. So this question is about dispositional hearing outcomes for TPR petitions specifically. We have the outcome categories as suspended judgment, termination of parental rights, and other. Please specify again. So please enter your totals for each outcome type, enter 0 where applicable, and select unable to report when that is the case. Question 35 is about motion practice. So for Article 10 and termination of parental rights petitions closed, report the total number of motions filed, specifying by type of motion. So this question asks you to report the number of motions filed in these categories listed here on the screen. So please provide the totals where you can. We will also have the option to select unable to report, although it is not pictured here. Okay, so we're going to get into the next section now, which is regarding the use of specialized services. And that can include social workers, caseworkers, parent advocates, mentors, investigators, experts, and so forth. We will be talking both about personnel, also known as salaried or in-house on staff positions, as well as contract positions, such as independent contractors, providers, for specialized services that are not in-house. Okay, question 36. Please report the number of Article 10 and termination of parental rights petitions closed during the reporting period in which any of the following services were provided. So, for example, of the petitions closed, let's say you utilize the services of a social worker on 3 abuse petitions. So you would enter a 3 here. Maybe you utilized the social worker services on 12 neglect petitions and 0 PPR petitions. You then specify under position type whether the social worker position is personnel or whether the position is contracted. And you'll go through and you'll do this for each type of specialized service that you utilized on the abuse, neglect, and TPR petitions closed during the reporting period. You'll note here that we have an other category at the bottom in case you have a specialized service type that is not captured or listed in the current selection above. So this slide provides a 3-step breakdown of how to answer the previous question. So I included this here so that when you go back and complete your report, you can review these steps. 37A, please provide a summary of your office's use of grant-funded specialized service personnel in Article 10 petitions. In your response, please describe how specialized service personnel are assigned and ways in which the utilization of specialized service personnel positively impacted representation. So, in other words, this question asks for a bit of a narrative about how specialized service personnel were utilized, how they were assigned, how they positively impacted the representation for parents. 37B is quite similar. The only distinction is that this asks for a summary of the specialized personnel who were contracted. So they were not in-house on staff, but they were still contracted using the grant funding. So please provide brief summaries for both 37A and 37B separately. Question 38. This question asks about grant-funded attorney positions. The question reads, please report the number of Article 10 attorney positions that are funded by the above ILS grants as of June 30th, 2024. For each attorney position, please provide the type, starting date, indicate if it was a new hire, an upgrade of an existing hire, i.e. an increase in hours, or an attorney position placed on contract, and select if the attorney provides supervision and/or mentorship to other staff in the office. Then enter the total number of Article 10 petitions assigned during the reporting period. If your office provides IR, please also include the number of IRs assigned during the reporting period. So again, this is about any attorney position that is funded by the ILS Family Defense Grant or the Model Office Grant. It is very similar to the performance measures question, which a number of you may be familiar with. If you are, you may know that we tend to get a lot of questions about that question, so it can be a bit complex. So we will walk through this together. You'll notice here that you have 6 columns to fill out per position. So beginning with type of position, then we have starting date, etc. So we'll go to the next slide and look at the step-by-step breakdown. Each step corresponds to one of those columns that you are asked to fill out. So step 1, beginning with attorney position 1, select the category that best represents the position. So you'll have a drop-down menu with these options listed. So chief attorney / administrator in charge, a supervising attorney, so any attorney that supervises the work of others or provides training or mentoring, a non-supervising attorney, any attorney who does not supervise the work of others or provide training or mentoring. You also have the option to select no attorney hired. So if the position has not yet been filled, please identify that here. Step 2, you input the starting date of that position. And please note that this is the start date of the first attorney to occupy the position. It becomes a little less straightforward if you've had turnover and maybe multiple attorneys have occupied the position, one at a time, of course. So you will always use the start date of the first attorney because that is when the position started. Step 3, indicate whether the attorney is a new hire, an upgrade of an existing hire, or on contract. So the instructions and definitions will be embedded throughout the report. You can see them on the PDF version. You can also, when you are reporting electronically, you can click on instructions and definitions and they will populate right there. For now, we will just briefly go through each type of position. So we have a new hire, which is any new attorney position that was filled as of June 30th, 2024. So by the end of the reporting period, it was filled. Next, we have an upgrade of an existing hire. So this is an attorney position that existed prior to the reporting period, but for which the hours were increased. Note that this is not about a raise, but it's specifically about an increase in hours. So let's say that before this grant, you maybe had an attorney that was an attorney position that was a part-time position, but with the grant funding, your office was able to upgrade that position to full-time. The last option we have here is on contract. So that is an attorney who occupies a position via contract to provide services. And this position must have been occupied, the attorney must have been working as of the end of the reporting period, so June 30th, 2024. This may apply for many of you who have an attorney that contracts to monitor the on-call line and provide legal advice or representation during the investigation phase. Step 4, indicate whether this position provides investigation representation. So that would be a yes or a no, but if your office does not provide investigation representation at all, you can enter N/A for not applicable. Step 5, enter the total number of Article 10 and TPR petitions assigned to this position through June 30th, 2024. Step 6, enter the total number of IRs assigned to this position through June 30th, 2024. So number 39, this question is very similar to number 38, but instead of asking about the attorney grant-funded positions, it asks about the specialized service grant-funded positions. We have the same categories in the chart here. So we have the type of position, the starting date, whether it's a new hire, an upgrade of an existing hire, or a specialized service position placed on contract. We also ask you to select if this specialized service professional provides supervision and/or mentorship to other staff in the office. Then we ask you to enter the total number of closed Article 10 petitions where the non-attorney positions were utilized during the reporting period. If your program provides IR, please also include the total number of IRs where the specialized services were used during the reporting period. If you do not provide IR, then you can enter not applicable in this column. So on this slide, I have another list of the 6 steps, this one specific for the specialized service positions. You'll follow the same procedure as you did for the attorney grant funded position question. So I won't get into all of the details again, but you'll have the instructions and definitions in the report, and you'll be able to apply the same concepts here. This next section on the report is about attorney-client communication. The section begins with a screener question, which asks, are you able to report the total number of petitions that correspond to the number of days that elapsed before an attorney had an in-person meeting outside of court with their client after the client was accepted for representation? So this question essentially is asking about the amount of time that elapsed between accepting the client for representation to having your first in-person meeting with them. So if you are able to answer that question, you select yes, and you'll automatically proceed to a follow-up question, number 41. If you select no, you aren't able to report on this, you will automatically skip to question 41B. So if you selected yes, this is where you will come to next, number 41. So for each category below, please report the total number of petitions that correspond to the number of days that elapsed before an attorney had an in-person meeting outside of court with their client after the client was accepted for representation. So for example, an attorney is assigned to a client for representation on a neglect petition on Monday. This attorney then meets with the client that following Wednesday. So 2 days elapse, you would tally a 1 next to 1 to 2 days. (41B). So whether you answered yes or no to the screener question, this asks you to provide a brief description of how your office manages attorney-client communication in IRs and Article 10 petitions. So please include any relevant policies or practices. For instance, if a program policy exists that requires the attorney to contact the client within a specified time frame after notification that the client is being investigated. So this is sort of a catch-all question, and this is where you can also include any information such as maybe your first client meetings tend to be virtual because you live in a rural area. Maybe most of your meetings are virtual with clients. You can provide any and all relevant information here, and that will help us better understand what practice looks like around the state and may inform the future questions on the report as well. The next section on the report is about CLEs and trainings. It begins with a screener question again. So number 42. Does the grant contract or do the grant contracts include funding for trainings and continuing legal education under the ILS grant? Please see attachment B1 of your contract if you are unsure. So attachment B1 is the budget section of your contract. By now, everyone who will be completing the report, so the model offices and the Family Defense Grants 1 and 2, should have received a copy of their budget and work plan. If you have not received a copy or need any clarification on this, please reach out to me and I'm happy to help. So if training was a part of your budget, you'll select yes and you'll proceed to the next question. And if not, you'll select no and you'll skip to number 45. So if you selected yes, you will then be taken to 43. So did you fund, co-sponsor, or host any ILS grant-funded trainings during the reporting period? If yes, then there's a little box for you to describe the training. And that can be very brief, maybe simply providing a title, to help understand the topic. For example, interdisciplinary collaboration and Article 10 representation may be a training topic. Question 44. Please report the total number of attorneys and specialized service professionals who utilized ILS grant funding to attend any type of training. So how many attorneys attended a training with the funding and how many specialized service professionals attended a training with this funding? You have two separate lines for each type of professional. And something to note here, let's say you had a social worker that attended 2 trainings during the reporting period. That would still only count as one because it is only one social worker that attended the trainings. Question 45. If you have not yet submitted your implementation memo, please upload it here. So as a reminder, the implementation memo is a summary of the steps you took to implement your project under this grant. And it serves to offer insight into implementation and provide a richer context for the numerical data reporting. It also informs ILS in terms of process when designing future grants. So for those of you here that are recipients of the 3rd Family Defense Grant, you may not yet have heard of the implementation memo, and that's okay. We will get into that in our data collection meetings. Question 46. This asks you to please upload any documents that you prepared or utilized as part of the grant funding. So for example, CLE training flyers, job descriptions, intake sheets, case closing forms, and so forth. Anything that you would like to include and would be happy to share with us, we would greatly appreciate it. So that's the end of the report form itself. Now we'll talk a little bit about how to submit your report. So step 1 is to click on the Question Pro survey link. We sent those links out on Monday, August 5th, 2024. So if you have any trouble accessing that link, do please reach out. Step 2 is to enter the data for your provider office. You can save progress and continue later as needed. Step 3, you click Submit, and you should be able to save a PDF version of your completed report on your end. However, if there are any glitches with that, please reach out and we will be happy to send you a copy of your completed form for your records. So the next steps. By now, you should have received a unique link to your Question Pro survey. Please submit your report by August 30th, 2024. And again, reach out with your questions in the meantime. You can email the Family Court inbox and we will get back to you as soon as we can. So the email address is fcdata@ils.ny.gov. And that is all for today. Thank you so much.